We'll be right back. Did I see it in the creek? Pick it up. Hold on. Okay, let me. All right, so I think a 24-24 format is ideal. So I'll chime you back in, okay? Got it right. A little bit better. Smooth over there. Okay, we got sound. We got sound. One quick second. Let's go.
Now a local tax expert will do your taxes for $150 all in. Well, thank you very much, Larry. It's great to be back in beautiful Davos, Switzerland, and to address so many respected business leaders, so many friends, few enemies, and all of the distinguished guests. It's a who's who, I will say that. I've come to this year's World Economic Forum with truly phenomenal news from America. Yesterday marked the one-year anniversary of my inauguration, and today, after 12 months back in the White House, our economy is booming, growth is exploding, productivity is surging, investment is soaring, incomes are rising.
Have a good day.
Inflation has been defeated, our previously open and dangerous border is closed and virtually impenetrable. And the United States is in the midst of the fastest and most dramatic economic turnaround in our country's history. Under the Biden administration, America was plagued by the nightmare of stagflation, meaning low growth, and high inflation, a recipe for misery, failure, and decline. But now, after just 1 year of my policies, we are witnessing the exact opposite. Virtually no inflation and extraordinarily high economic growth like I believe you'll see very shortly. Our country has never seen before, perhaps no country has ever seen before. Over the past 3 months, core inflation has been just 1.6%.
Let's go Associated Press. Sounds much better.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I guess we don't have enough seats today. In the last quarter century, a sitting president of the United States has come to Davos only twice. Both times it was Donald Trump. So when I asked to serve in this new role that I have, he was one of the first leaders I called and invited to return. I first met the president about 25 years ago, but I worked most closely with him during the early months of COVID. This was March 2020. Markets were under extreme stress. Some economists were warning we could be headed towards a second Great Depression. What stood out to me during the extraordinary period was the president's willingness to bring together people from governments, business, across institutions, across perspective, to think differently, and importantly, to act decisively. That instinct to act
may need crowns, some may need filling, some may need nothing. The goal is to help them in their journey. And our goal is always to educate them to prevent anything. One of the most powerful tools in which we have is something called Overjet. Why? Overjet allows us to break down what we are seeing in an X-ray. Every time you go into an office, an X-ray is taken. When an X-ray,
especially in pivotal moments, is one reason I think he values the World Economic Forum. It is a unique institution that brings together the largest combination of government officials, business leaders, technology leaders, civil society and NGO leaders, anywhere in the world for a genuine dialogue. And particularly, importantly, this year.
You are the secret
Thankfully,
to my success.
this group is meeting under better economic circumstances than during the pandemic. But once again, we're forcing very serious different economic conditions around the world. One of the central challenges that is impacting me is how capitalism can benefit more, and how can we broaden our global economy for greater and greater participation. That is a question where the president has shown real leadership through investing in infrastructure, reducing barriers to growth, and initiatives like the Trump account designed to give more Americans a direct stake in the growth of the U.S. economy. As he enters the second year of his second term, we are interested in hearing his plans for 2026 and beyond, and will no doubt create more and more conversation. And that's what the forum is about, a serious conversation in the spirit of dialogue. Discussions where the world is headed, where are we going, and these discussions would be incomplete without the President of the United States, the most important leader in the world. We appreciate him here, so let me introduce and welcome back to Davos the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. Well, thank you very much, Larry. It's great to be back in beautiful Davos, Switzerland, and to address so many respected business leaders, so many friends, few enemies, and all of the distinguished guests. It's a who's who, I will say that. I've come to this year's World Economic Forum with truly phenomenal news from America. Yesterday marked the one-year anniversary of my inauguration, and today, after 12 months back in the White House, our economy is booming, growth is exploding, productivity is surging, investment is soaring, incomes are rising, inflation has been defeated, our previously open and dangerous border is closed and virtually impenetrable. And the United States is in the midst of the fastest and most dramatic economic turnaround in our country's history. Under the Biden administration, America was plagued by the nightmare of stagflation, meaning low growth, and high inflation, a recipe for misery, failure, and decline. But now, after just 1 year of my policies, we are witnessing the exact opposite. Virtually no inflation and extraordinarily high economic growth like I believe you'll see very shortly our country has never seen before, perhaps no country has ever seen before. Over the past 3 months, core inflation has been just 1.6%. Meanwhile, fourth quarter growth is projected to be 5.4%, far greater than anybody other than myself and a few others had predicted. Since the election, the stock market has set 52 all-time high records. So that's in 1 year, 52 records, adding $9 trillion in value to retirement accounts, 401ks, and people's savings. People are doing very well. They're very happy with me. Since my inauguration, we've lifted more than 1.2 million people off of food stamps, and after 4 years, in which Biden secured less than $1 trillion of new investment in our country. Think of that, $1 trillion, substantially less than that. In 4 years, we've secured commitments for a record-breaking $18 trillion, and we think when the final numbers come out, they'll be closer to $20 trillion of investment. That's never been done by any country at any time, not even close. just over 1 year ago under the radical left Democrats, we were a dead country. Now we are the hottest country anywhere in the world. In fact, the United States economy is on pace to grow at double the rate that was projected by the IMF just last April. And with my growth and tariff policies, it should be much higher. I really believe we can be much higher than that. And this is all great news, and it's great for all nations. The USA is the economic engine on the planet, and when America booms, the entire world booms. It's been the history. When it goes bad, it goes bad. You all follow us down, and you follow us up, and we're at a point that I don't believe we've ever been. I never thought we could do it this quickly. My biggest surprise is I thought it would take more than a year, maybe like a year and 1 month. But it's happened very quickly. This afternoon, I want to discuss how we've achieved this economic miracle, how we intend to raise living standards for our citizens to levels never seen before, and perhaps how you too, the places where you come from, can do much better by following what we're doing, because certain places in Europe are not even recognizable, frankly, anymore. They're not recognizable. And we can argue about it, but there's no argument. Friends come back from different places. I don't want to insult anybody and say I don't recognize it. And that's not in a positive way. That's in a very negative way. And I love Europe, and I want to see Europe go good. But it's not heading in the right direction. In recent decades, it became conventional wisdom in Washington and European capitals that the only way to grow a modern Western economy was through ever-increasing government spending, unchecked mass migration, and endless foreign imports. The consensus was that so-called dirty jobs and heavy industry should be sent elsewhere, that affordable energy should be replaced by the Green New Scam, and that countries could be propped up by importing new and entirely different populations from faraway lands. This was the path that Sleepy Joe Biden administration and many other Western governments very foolishly followed, turning their backs on everything that makes nations rich.
That's the sound of an American oil company hard at work. You want to be a part of it? Listen up. Hello.
Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to be back here at Congress Hall. Hopefully everybody had a good day yesterday and are enjoying it today. It is my real pleasure to introduce Jensen Huang, who is somebody I admire, somebody I've watched, and somebody who has been a teacher to me on the journey of learning about technology and AI. It is amazing watching how he led NVIDIA. And I don't measure myself on comparisons, but I like this one comparison. So since NVIDIA has been public, which was in 1999, same year as BlackRock. Oh boy. Okay. Now, NVIDIA's total return for its shareholders has been a compounded 37%. Just think about that. What would that mean to every pension fund if they invested in NVIDIA as an IPO? The amount of successes we have with everybody's retirement. At the same time, BlackRock's annualized total return has been 1%. Not so bad for a financial services company, but it certainly pales. But that is just a really great indication of Jensen's leadership, the positioning NVIDIA, and also it is a great statement about what the world believes in the future of NVIDIA. So Jensen, congratulations on that journey, and I know we have many more years of that journey ahead of us.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My only regret was at the IPO, after the IPO, I wanted to buy my parents something nice. And so I sold NVIDIA stock at a valuation of $300 million. The company was at a valuation of $300 million, and I bought them a Mercedes S-Class. It is the most expensive car in the world. They regret it.
They still have it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, they still have it. Yeah.
Good. Let me go into the subject matter now, but I just want to say, the debate on AI is about how it's going to change the world and the global economy. Today, I want to talk about how AI can add to the world economy, and how AI can increasingly become a foundational technology that everyone in this room can be utilizing, enhancing our lives, enhancing the lives of everyone in the world. And we need to talk about how it's going to reshape productivity, labor, infrastructure across virtually every other sector. But importantly, how it's going to reshape the world, and how can more segments of the world benefit from AI, and how can we ensure that we have a broadening of the global economy, not a narrowing of the global economy. And I can't think of another person who has a clearer view on not just what AI is, but the infrastructure around it, the infrastructure that is necessary to build around it. And because so many of the major hyperscalers are utilizers of what NVIDIA creates, and the whole engagement around the infrastructure around AI and the potential of AI, I think we have a great voice to listen to this afternoon or this morning. So Jensen, once again, thank you. This is his first time here at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and I know you have a really busy schedule, so thank you for taking that time.
I appreciate that.
So let me go right into it. Why do you believe that AI has the potential to be that significant engine of growth? And what makes this moment, this technology, different than past technology cycles?
This is first of all, when you think about AI and you're interacting with AI in all these different ways, ChatGPT, of course, using Gemini, of course, using Anthropic, Claude, of course, and the magical things that it could do, it's helpful to reason back to the first principles of fundamentally what is happening to the computing stack. This is a platform shift. A platform is something where applications are built on top of. And this is a platform shift like the platform shift to PCs. New applications were developed to run on a new type of computer. A platform shift to the internet, a new type of computing platform, hosted all kinds of new applications. A platform shift to mobile cloud. In each and every one of these platform shifts, the computing stack was reinvented and new applications were created. This is a new platform shift in the sense that today you're using ChatGPT. It's important to understand that itself is an application, but very importantly, new applications will be built on top of ChatGPT. New applications will be built on top of Anthropic, Claude, for example. And so it's a platform shift in that way. AI is really easy to understand if you realize what it can do that you could never do before. Software in the past was effectively pre-recorded. Humans would type and describe the algorithm or the recipe for the computer to execute. It was able to process structured information, meaning you've got to put the name, the address, their account number, their age, where they live. You create these structured tables that software would then go and retrieve information from. We call it SQL queries. SQL is the single most important database engine the world's ever known. Almost everything ran on SQL before now. Now we have a computer that can understand unstructured information, meaning it could look at an image and understand it. It could look at text and understand it. It's completely unstructured. It could listen to sound and understand the meaning of it, understand the structure of it, and reason about what to do about it. And so, for the first time, we now have a computer that is not pre-recorded, but it's processed in real time, meaning that it's able to take the context of the circumstance, whatever the the environmental information, the contextual information, and whatever information you give it, it could reason about what is the meaning of that information and reason about your intent, which could be described in a really unstructured way. You describe it however you want to describe it. We call it prompts, but you describe it however you like to describe it. And to the extent that it can understand your intention, it could perform a task for you. Now, the important thing about this is that because we're reinventing that entire computing stack, the question is, what is AI? You're asking, when you think about AI, you think about the AI models. But it's really important to understand industrially, AI is actually essentially a 5-layer cake. At the bottom is energy. AI, because it's processed in real time and it generates intelligence in real time, it needs energy to do so. Energy is the first layer. The second layer is the layer that I live in. It's chips. It's in computing infrastructure. The next layer above it is the cloud infrastructure, the cloud services. The layer above that is the AI models. This is where most people think AI is. But don't forget that in order for those models to happen, you have to have all of the layers underneath it. But the most important layer, and this is the layer that's happening right now, the reason why last year was an incredible year, frankly, for AI, is that the AI models made so much progress that the layer above it, which is ultimately the layer that we all need to succeed, the application layer above that. And so this application layer could be in financial services, it could be in healthcare, it could be in manufacturing. This layer on top ultimately is where economic benefit will happen. But the important thing, though, because this computing platform requires all of the layers underneath it, it has started, and you guys are, everybody's seeing it right now, it has started the largest infrastructure build out in human history. We're now a few $100 billion into it. We're a few $100 billion into it. Larry and I, we get the opportunity to work on many projects together. There are trillions of dollars of infrastructure that needs to be built out. And it's sensible. It's sensible because all of these contexts have to be processed so that the AI, so that the models can generate the intelligence necessary to power the applications that ultimately sit on top. And so when you go back and when you reason about it layer by layer by layer, and you realize that the energy sector is now seeing extraordinary growth. The chip sector, TSMC just announced they're going to build 20 new chip plants. Foxconn, working with us, and Wistron and Quanta, building 30 new computer plants, which then go into these AI factories. So we have chip factories, computer factories, and AI factories all being built around the world in memory. Right, exactly. Those chip fabs. Micron has started investing $200 billion in the United States. SK Hynix is doing incredibly. Samsung is doing incredibly. You can see that entire chip layer growing incredibly today. And now, of course, we pay a lot of attention to the model layer, but it's really exciting that the layer above them is really doing fantastically. And now, one indicator is where the VC funding going into. Last year, 2025, was one of the largest years in VC funding ever. And last year, most of the funding went to what is called AI native companies. These are companies in healthcare, the company in robotics, the company in manufacturing, financial services, all of the large industries in the world. You're seeing huge investments going in to those AI natives because for the first time, the models are good enough to build on top of.
So let's just dive a little further. Obviously, everybody, I'm sure, uses their own chatbot and getting information. But you're talking about this version of AI is going to be the key. Let's talk about, like, you go into a little more upside ideas related to the dispersion of it in the physical world. You mentioned, obviously, healthcare is a great example of that. But where do you see the transformational opportunities in areas like transportation or science?
Well, last year, I would say three major things happened in AI, in the AI technology layer, the model layer. The first one is that the models themselves started out being curious and interesting, but they hallucinated a great deal. And last year, we can all reasonably accept that these models are better grounded. They could do research. They can reason about circumstances that maybe they weren't trained on. Break it down into step-by-step reasoning steps, and come up with a plan to answer your question. Do your research or perform the task. So last year we saw the evolution of language models becoming AI systems that we call agentic systems, agentic AI. The second major breakthrough is the breakthrough of open models. Several years ago, was it a year ago? DeepSeek came out, and DeepSeek was a lot of people were quite concerned about it. Frankly, DeepSeek was a huge event for most of the industries, most of the companies around the world, because it's the world's first open reasoning model. Since then, a whole bunch of open reasoning models have emerged, and open models has enabled companies and industries, researchers, educators, the university startups to be able to use these open models to start something and create something that's domain specific or specialized for their needs. The third area that had enormous progress last year was the concept of physical intelligence, of physical AI. AI that understands not just language, but AI understands, if you will, nature. And it could be AI that understands the physical world here, AIs that understand proteins, chemicals, natural physics of physics, for example, dynamics, particle physics, quantum physics, AIs that are now learning all these different structures and different languages, if you will. Proteins is essentially a language. And so all of these AIs are now making such enormous progress that these industrial companies, whether it's manufacturing or drug discovery, are really making great progress. And one of the great indicators is a partnership that we had with Lilly that they realize now that AI has made such an extraordinary progress in understanding the structure of proteins and the structure of chemicals, essentially be able to interact and talk to the proteins like we talk to ChatGPT. We're going to see some really big breakthroughs.
Client of Charles Schwab, do they pay for your tax plannings and filings to be done for you every year? What about your estate planning and any trust work that you might need done? Do you feel like you're getting true, tangible value from your financial advisory firm? Or do you feel...
So all these breakthroughs raises concerns about the human element. You and I have had many conversations on this, but we need to tell the whole audience there is a huge concern that AI is going to displace jobs. And you've been arguing the opposite. Obviously, the build out of AI, as you talked about, the biggest infrastructure build out in history is going to occur, which
energy is creating jobs, chips industry is creating jobs, the infrastructure layer is creating jobs, land power and shell, jobs. I mean, right, it's incredible.
So let's get into it a little more detail. So you actually believe we're going to face labor shortages. And so how do you see that AI and robotics changing the nature of work rather than eliminating it?
There's several different ways that we can think through it. First of all, this is the largest infrastructure build out in human history. That's going to create a lot of jobs, and it's wonderful that the jobs are related to tradecraft, and we're going to have plumbers and electricians and construction and steel workers and network technicians and people who install and fit out the equipment, and all of these jobs. We're going to, in the United States, we're seeing quite a significant boom in this area as salaries have gone up nearly double. And so we're talking about six-figure salaries for people who are building chip factories or computer factories or AI factories. And we have a great shortage in that. And I'm really delighted to see so many people in so many countries really recognizing this important area. Everybody should be able to make a great living. You don't need to have a PhD in computer science to do so. And so I'm delighted to see that. The second thing to realize, and so we theorize about the automation of tasks and things like that, and what is the implication to jobs. I'll just offer some anecdotes. These are real world anecdotes of what has actually happened. Remember 10 years ago, one of the first professions that everybody thought was going to get wiped out was radiology. And the reason for that was the first AI that became superhuman in capability was computer vision. And one of the largest applications of computer vision is studying scans by radiologists. Well, 10 years later, it is true that AI has now completely permeated and diffused into every aspect of radiology. And it is true that radiologists use AI to study scans now. The impact is 100%, and the impact is completely real. However, not surprisingly, I say not surprisingly, if you reason from first principles, not surprisingly, the number of radiologists have gone up.
Is that because of lack of trust, or is that because the human interaction with the results of AI
Exactly.
is a better outcome?
Exactly. The reason for that is because a radiologist, their job, the purpose of their job is to diagnose disease, to help patients diagnose disease. That's the purpose of their job. The task of the job includes studying scans. The fact that they're able to study scans now infinitely fast allows them to spend more time with patients, diagnosing their disease, interacting with the patients, interacting with other clinicians. Well, surprisingly, also not surprisingly, actually, as a result of that, the number of patients that the hospital can see has gone up because there's a lot of people waiting a long time to get their scans done, and so now because the number of patients have gone up, the revenues of the hospital has gone up, they hire more radiologists. This is the same thing as happening to nurses. We're 5 million nurses short in the United States. As a result of using AI to do the charting and the transcription of the patient visits, nurses spend half of their time charting. And now they could use AI technology, and one particular company at Bridge, their partner of ours, doing incredible work. As a result of that, the nurses can spend more time visiting patients. Give a touch. That's right. And because you can now see more patients, and we're no longer less bottlenecked by the number of nurses, more patients could get into the hospital sooner. As a result, hospitals do better. They hire more nurses. And so, surprisingly, AI is increasing their not surprisingly, AI is increasing their productivity. As a result, the hospitals are doing better. They want to hire more people. You have too many people waiting too long to get into hospitals. And so these are two perfect examples. Now, the easiest way to think about what is the impact of AI on a particular job is to understand whether the job, what is the purpose of the job, and what is the task of the job. If you just put a camera on the two of us and just watched us, you would probably think the two of us are typists because I spend all of my time typing. And so if AI could automate so much word prediction and help us type, then we would be out of jobs. But obviously that's not our purpose. And so the question is, what is the purpose of your job? In the case of radiologists and nurses, is to care for people. And that purpose is enhanced and made more productive because the task has been automated. And so to the extent that you can reason about each one of the people's purpose versus the task, I think it's a helpful framework.
Let's move this beyond the developed economies. Help me understand how AI is going to broaden the world and help the world. I read an Anthropic piece this past weekend. Basically said the utilization of AI most recently is very dominant by the educated society. They're even seeing the educated component of each society being heavily more utilized. And obviously, they're using it against their own model pod, so it may have its own biases. So, how do we ensure that AI is a transformational technology, maybe like what the Wi-Fi and 5G was for the emerging world? And when you intersect that, what does it mean for the emerging world? And how do we broaden the global economy? And two, Getting back to the whole job situation with robotics and AI, there is going to be some substitution there. And there's substitution in the United States already going on. We may be creating more plumbers and electricians, but we probably need less analysts at financial institutions. Lawyers need less analysts, because they're able to accumulate the data faster. So let's just pivot on to the emerging world for a second, the developing world. How do you see that play out?
Well, first of all, AI is infrastructure, and there's not one country in the world I can't imagine that you need to have AI as part of your infrastructure, because every country has its electricity, you have your roads, you should have AI as part of your infrastructure. Of course, you can always import AI, but AI is not so incredibly hard to train these days, and because there's so many open models, these open models with your local expertise, you should be able to create models that are helpful to your own country. And so I really believe that every country should get involved to build AI infrastructure, build your own AI, take advantage of your fundamental natural resource, which is your language and culture, develop your AI, continue to refine it, and have your national intelligence be part of your ecosystem. And so I think that's number one. And number two, remember, AI is super easy to use. It is the easiest software to use in history, and that's the reason why it's the fastest growing and most rapidly adopted. I mean, in just a couple of 2-3 years, it's coming up to almost a billion people. I think, first of all, Claude is incredible. Anthropic has made a huge progress, huge leap in developing Claude. We use it all over our company. The coding capability of Claude, its reasoning capability, its ability is just really incredible. And anybody with a software company really ought to get involved and use it. On the other hand, ChatGPT is probably the most successful consumer AI in history. And its ease of use and its approachability, I think everybody should get involved. And whether it's somebody in a developing country or a student, it is very clear that it is essential to learn how to use AI, how to direct an AI, how to prompt an AI, how to manage an AI, how to guardrail the AI, evaluate the AI. These skills are no different than leading people, managing people, things that you and I do all the time. So in the future, instead of biological, carbon-based AIs, in the future we're also going to have digital versions of AIs, silicon versions of AIs, and we'll have to manage them. They're just part of our digital workforce, if you will. And so I would advocate that for the developing countries, build your infrastructure, get engaged in AI, and recognize that AI is likely to close the technology divide, because it is so easy to use and so abundant and so accessible. And so,
hey, you, finance professional, scrolling YouTube because you're avoiding work. Extraordinary panel here to join me in conversation. Larry Fink is here from BlackRock. Of course, he oversees now $14 trillion, and I should also mention is the co-chair of this year's World Economic Forum, and you've done an extraordinary job. Interim. Ken Griffin is here. Ken Griffin is here. He's the founder and CEO of Citadel. He oversees $65 billion investment capital, and he has been at the forefront of finance over the last several decades, and has been one of really the one most prescient about where the economy has been headed, and we're going to talk to him in just a moment as well. And then we have European historian Adam Tooze here. He's also the director of European Institute at Columbia University. He's the author of 5 books, including The Deluge, The Great War, America and the Remaking of the Global Order, 1916 to 1931. So that will capture some of the period we're talking about. And in just a moment, Christine Lagarde is going to be joining us, and we are looking forward to talking to her as well about this. But I'm going to start with Adam, if you could, to sort of help us set the table, to give us some historical context to this moment, because there are some remarkable parallels. We are going through a remarkable boom right now. Some of it's technology related. There was a technology related issue then. There were all sorts of monetary issues then. tariffs, which came a little bit later, but you can start to see what that looks like.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I do want to express my thanks to Larry Fink for putting on this Davos the way he has. It's been quite an extraordinary experience, a real privilege to be here. And yeah, I want to take up exactly where you left off, Andrew, because I think you're right. I don't think we should be in the business of doing automatic repetition type stories about history. I don't think that's how history works. Mark Twain's great line about history not repeating but rhyming is a useful one. And I do think there are various points in the 20s that are very pertinent to our current moment. One is the technological side. It really was a moment of a new era, especially in electrical technology, but also in mass production. So this is the era of Ford, quintessentially. This is when Fordism becomes a global phenomenon, and also a kind of social model. It's a high wage, high effort, high consumption bargain, which stabilizes, in the best case, high levels of consumption and the growth model of the 20th century. But I think more ominously, and I've really got Mark Carney's speech from yesterday, really astonishing speech in my mind, is that one of the things we prefer to forget about the 20s is that it is, to most contemporaries, the first moment of unipolarity. This is the moment they think liberal power is triumphant. Why? Because the liberal powers won World War I. 20s follow World War I, an epic revolutionary war, the first total war. And the powers that prevail are the powers that, in a sense, for a while still held the ring, and whose the end of whose hegemony Mark Carney was talking about yesterday afternoon. In other words, the British Empire, the French Empire, and the United States. Two republics, the liberal empire par excellence, and Russia was their only ally, and it succumbs to revolution in 1917 and becomes a more radical power. And the basis for their power was money. It was finance. It was the dollar's hegemony in the 1920s that was supposed to anchor this world that was otherwise really fragile. So for me, the haunting evocation of the 20s is this was collectively people like us's first effort at stabilizing the world. And we failed at the politics, famously, at Versailles and in the League of Nations. We thought that a good substitute would be technology and finance. And for a while in the 1920s, that formula looked like it would work, because in the end, the gold standard system became an increasingly dollar-centered system. And the hubris and the failure of imagination and the failure of politics never provided the underpinnings for that structure. That was not a moment I expected to have in my life, to be speaking about the 1920s and have Madame Lagarde appear on stage. The discrepancy between the power of economics, the power of production, and the reliance on money, and notably the dollar, and the failure in that context to build deep political connections, for me, is really what the 20s stand for. And that is why, for me, it's so resonant in the current moment, because the crucial power here is the United States. The crucial power in the 20s was the United States. Those new technologies were American. The money that mattered was American. And it's America that essentially for domestic political reasons, defaults on its hegemonic obligations.
Madame Lagarde, I want to welcome you. Thank you for joining us. We're very happy to have you. And I would actually go to you if I could, just for a moment.
Just now.
But I'll tell you why. Because you gave a speech back in the fall of 2024, and you said that you believed actually that there was a parallel taking place between the AI bubble in the 2020s and 1920s and 2020s. And you said, today, like back then, we are seeing setbacks in global trade integration at the same time as strides forward in technological progress. And we were trying to sort of put this moment in a historical context. And so I was hoping you could elaborate and explain what you meant by that.
Very happy to. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm sorry I'm late, but initially it was scheduled at 9 and I had something really committed at 8:15 and I had to run from wherever I was. So I trust that Adam went through the political similarities, divergences, and I don't want to venture there. What I meant in my speech, which was back in 24, so things have changed since that, and they have not changed for the better. What I meant to compare is the technological breakthrough that took place in the 1920s, whether you look at the size and scope of the electrical grid, whether you look at the combustion engine and its developments, whether you look at the assembly lines that we're developing, those were technological breakthrough that took place in those years and decades. At the same time, you also had a stock market that was doing very well. And what we observed in the 20s, and maybe Adam, you went through that, is a significant change in the global trade. I wouldn't call it a collapse, but it went from 21% of GDP roughly down to 14% in a matter of a few years. So what we're looking at now is galloping digitalization of our economies with a particular focus on artificial intelligence. We're seeing stock markets that are doing extremely well, particularly, well, not only in advanced economies, but also in emerging market economies. And we are seeing a fragmentation of geopolitics, more on that and to be continued, which is accompanied by an increase of the tariff, of the import and export restrictions in almost all categories of products. So, and this is unprecedented as long as WTO observes those restrictions. We're not seeing yet the collapse of trade in the numbers that I have mentioned. Not yet. It's still holding. It's still holding. Question is that going to hold? But the key point that I would like to make, if you give me a little more time, is that the big difference between the 20s and now, in a way, which makes the current situation more unpredictable and probably more icy. I just came back from this cold out there, so icy is a good word for that. Is the fact that those breakthrough of the 1920s could diffuse, to use a colloquial language, could diffuse within boundaries, within national territories. You did not necessarily need, in those days, the scale, the network effects that you need now. Now, if you ask the big G's in digitalization and the big spenders in artificial intelligence, and just for memory, to develop a frontier model today requires about $1 billion. If you ask them what they need, they will say access to data as large as possible. They will say scale in order to really amortize the investment cost of the development of models. Now that would be significantly jeopardized if we have limited access to data because of different privacy laws around the world, and more protectionist barriers that would prevent the scaling of these investments. Now, I might be having an overly negative and pessimistic view of what we are seeing at the moment, but I think that's a real threat. And the development of AI, the gain of productivity that we hope for, is difficult to reconcile with fragmentation in terms of standards, licensing, access. And I would contend that this can only be remedied by a degree of cooperation. That is going to be a factor of willingness of people to accept and tolerate different paradigms, different cultural preferences, and different views of the world. It's difficult.
Larry, speak to that, if you could, because I can tell you're thinking about it.
Well, I spent a lot of time on it. I think what Christine said is a foundation of a major issue. But I would turn the lens a little bit. I think for the Western economies, if we don't cooperate, if we don't scale, China wins. There's enough population there. Privacy laws are obviously quite different there. And so the data that they can accumulate, which is giving them a dramatic advantage. And I think that's going to be one of the big overwhelming things. When people ask me, are we in an AI bubble? I said, I think there are going to be some big failures, but I don't think we're in a bubble. But that being said, I would much rather say that we need to spend more money to make sure that we're competing properly against China. And so to me, all the issues that Christine has raised, they're there, they're obvious, they're things that we need to be addressing. Right now, we're at this point now where everybody believes there's going to be a massive J curve of demand for that information from AI. The key to that is making sure that the demand only comes if technology is diffused for more applications, more utilizations. If technology is just the domain of the 6 hyperscalers, we will fail. And so, to me, it is, and we don't have enough information yet. The key, how fast we diffuse it, how quickly is it adapted and adopted. To me, are going to be the 2 key characteristics. The parallels for me for 1929 and
Looking for tax help? Now there are TurboTax experts right in your neighborhood. They get to know your unique situation and get you every dollar you deserve. So hand off your taxes to a local TurboTax expert today.
Here's to the go-getters. And not just the ones in the gym, but everywhere.
To 2029, to me, the big 2 factors that are, to me, the limiting factors are going to be, can we grow out our economies fast enough to overcome our deficits? That's going to be one big issue, especially with the rising deficits of the U.S. And the 2, the capabilities of the capital markets to continue to fund these investments, to make the Western economies having the capabilities to have that J curve in the adoption of technology.
So let me ask you, and we can go to Ken on this, and it's reflective of something actually Larry's talked about over the past couple of years. Larry wrote a letter called The Democratization of Finance. That was a phrase used in the 1920s. There was a real effort to democratize finance, to raise funds from the public. There was a huge amount of debt that helped finance the decade. And I wonder how you think about this moment, and sort of when you think about the systemic risk of this moment, the concentration of AI, the debt that's financing some of it. I know some of the hyperscalers are obviously enormously powerful and have extraordinary funds, but there is also a lot of debt behind all this that's sloshing around.
So, first of all, it's a pleasure to be on the gloom and doom panel.
Yeah, we're not doom. The 1920s were an extraordinary period. As I said at the beginning, it's not preordained.
I just love the end note of the 1920s, which was, of course, the Great Depression, Andrew. So let's take a step back and talk about where we are right here, right now. The area of recklessness is the spending of governments around the world, who are all, with little exception, all spending well beyond their means. That's the recklessness of this moment in history. This is not a parallel to the 1920s in terms of the recklessness of the private capital markets. It's a story of the recklessness of government spending. Within the private sector, there's a huge question as to where AI will take us. And I was carefully taking notes and listening to what Larry has to say, or to what Madame Lagarde has to say, because this is one of the big issues of our moment. Will AI create the productivity acceleration that is honestly just hoped for in Washington and in the halls of government around the world as a way to overcome the profligate spending that we're currently engaged in? Like the world needs a savior, and the hope is that AI is the savior that we need for productivity. And the challenge with this is it may or may not be. We just don't know yet. Now, there's a tremendous amount of hype around AI, and in some sense, the large AI companies need to create that hype to raise the tens or actually hundreds of billions of dollars of investment that are going to the field. Like, you wouldn't be able to raise hundreds of billions of dollars. We'll spend, and Larry can probably correct me on this, but roughly $600 billion this year in CapEx for data centers in the United States.
I think it's going to be larger. But does that mean that it's getting hyped up too much, or just the hype is required as a sales mechanism?
The next interval course, is going to
First of
be
all,
April.
so much of the data centers are being
That
built
puts
for
us
cloud. Right.
in a target frame.
And the
February,
big issue is
March.
going to be in terms of
And
monetization
I'm
of
still
the
processing
spend.
all of these data.
The data
points.
centers are being
I still
built
have the tool.
for AI, require more
I'm
advanced
making
chips.
new NFTs.
The question is, what is the lifetime of that chip?
Busy with
If we have new
everything
technological
else,
changes, the
trying to
lifetime of the chip in
research.
1 year, that spend is going to be really a bad spend. If the lifetime is expected to be 4 or 5 years, and then those chips can be used for cloud, then I think these investments are going to prove to be good investments. So I think it's going to be, if the speed of technology changes and all these investments now, it's going to be challenged. But I agree with Ken. I think we don't know enough, but I'm personally very optimistic on how AI is going to affect the world.
Madam Lagarde, can I ask you a question to take on the issue that I think Ken raised, just about the amount of debt in the system today? Not talking about corporate debt, but sovereign debt. And the reason I ask is, back in the 1920s, at least in the United States, there was a budget surplus. I believe there was actually a budget surplus in a lot of other countries as well, not everywhere, of course. But today in the U.S., there's $38 billion of debt. And the playbook that we all learned, actually, in the aftermath of 1929 is, what do you do when there's a crisis to stem it? You throw money at a problem. Ben Bernanke learned this and evacuated in 2008. We did it again during the pandemic. And the thing that I've always thought about is, the next time there is a panic of some sort, there'll be a pullback of some sort, whether the politicians say, well, we now have the playbook, we know what we're supposed to do, and we're going to write a check for $5 trillion because that's what we're supposed to do. Except that we keep wondering, is there some kind of invisible line in the bond market around the world that turns into a red line where the investor class says, we're not doing it anymore. And then by the way, you get into sort of an austerity vicious cycle.
Ridiculous. It's just
Two things.
So
I'm not going to address your question right away because I want to come back to a point that was made by both Larry and Ken, I think. And I'm not denying that investment in artificial intelligence can be extremely net positive and will deliver productivity gains, the amount of which is questionable, and you have a spectrum that is quite large as to how much it will deliver. But I think that to come back to my minimum cooperation needed for that, we also have to consider that it's capital intensive, energy intensive, and data intensive.
That's crazy.
And we have to be mindful of the three.
The first thing I said,
in terms of energy intensity, what kind of energy is being used to manage data will matter. What the consequences will be on the people will matter as well. So I think that in this cooperation approach that we have, which will have to take care of data privacy, for instance, and preferences in different corners of the world, we also need to be mindful of the energy consumption and what kind of energy it is and what impact it has on climate. And number two, we have to be mindful of the consequences for people. Because unless we move in this dream world of Keynes,
you're trying to give me $20
where
million?
working is a choice in a way, which I don't see on the medium-term horizon. We have to understand what consequences it has on people, unless we want to risk a dislocation of society. I come back to your point. Yes, debt has increased massively and is increasing in some corners more than others. I think the real question is what is done with that financing that the sovereigns are accumulating. Not all debts are the same. Debt that is invested in necessary, productive projects, or necessary for security purposes, will always find people to finance it. That's my assumption.
It's about 10,000.
Debts that are not for productive purposes, that are not going to sustain growth on a sustainable basis, that will be far more difficult. So I'm not going to tell you that there is a red line. I'm not going to tell you that central banks will always be around either. But I think that the nature of the purpose for which debt is subscribed will matter more than the actual volume.
Speak to what you did. You just said something very interesting.
No, I'm not going to speak more to it.
No, to the idea that central banks might not always be around. What do you mean by that?
Look, I went through my lot of crises, as many of you have as well. And I remember the days when it was mentioned that, central bankers are the only game in town. this is not the right approach to a balanced and durable equilibrium. Measures have to be taken by fiscal authorities. Reforms have to be undertaken. The purpose for which spending is organized has to be thought through, and the consequences on people if we want society to stay together.
My name is Adam Ferrari, Chief Executive Officer of Phoenix Energy. I look forward to you joining us at our next investor webinar, where you can drill deeper into our 9 to 13% annual interest rate bond offerings. See how our company has become an emerging leader in the oil and gas industry. In 2024, Phoenix Energy.
And the consequences on people if we want society to stay together.
So just, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but are you basically saying that in our legislative branches around the world, we have abdicated responsibility of being fiscally prudent and thoughtful as to how we use society's resources, and have become overly reliant upon central banks to continue to try to keep the economy going in the right direction against this onslaught of reckless spending?
I'm not suggesting it's the case now, but we have observed it in the past.
I wish you guys could see.
I mean, the historic irony is that when people talked about central banks being the only game in town in the 2010s, what they were actually urging is more active fiscal policy. Right? Because the problem was that we had a low inflation environment, a stagnant growth, including notable figures at BlackRock were arguing for a more assertive fiscal policy because there was a deep imbalance between the two levers of macroeconomic policy, which was also a lesson of the 1920s. And right now, what you're arguing for, I take it, is a more just abstract proposition that it is crucial to have, as Ken's suggesting, responsibility in every arm of government. And that responsibility pertains not just to the macro aggregates, I'm hearing you say, but to the specific type of spending. Your distinction between the productive and the unproductive is not just for economic purposes, but also for the question of political legitimacy and social coherence, the crucial thing. Because the social bargain in Europe and in the United States, but really in Europe, is deeply stressed, I think, by the perception that modern welfare states are unproductive. And a huge number of really vicious distributional struggles which are reawakening another 1920s ghost, which is the ghost of fascism, right? The sort of political parties which certain visitors to the conference would quite like us to give more platform to, who are direct heirs to that kind of tradition. They are mobilizing in Europe right now around the delegitimization of public spending, which axes on this productive, unproductive, national, international, migrant, ethnic, national, and so that's why these politics are explosive.
But Adam, in 2010, the mantra was too big to fail, which Andrew wrote about, but because of that mantra, too big to fail, there was a societal view, do not bail out. So there was not much fiscal stimulus as much as necessary. But I would say the learning lesson from that was 2020, where you could argue we used huge amounts of fiscal stimulus, probably too much, looking backwards. So I actually believe, we're all evolving in which lever to pull. And so I think Europe, especially after 2008 and 9, probably did not use enough fiscal stimulus. But in the 2020s, because of COVID, we probably used way too much fiscal stimulus.
It also depends on what structures you have, again, because the Europeans they essentially have part-time working systems which keep people in employment, whereas America, with surging unemployment in 2020 and no national unemployment insurance system that actually works, has to rely on this sugar-high, trillion-dollar check in the mail emergency bailout of American society, and it's easy to overdo that. I mean, in my view, it's one of the great macroeconomic success stories of recent times. It has, but you're absolutely right. Where the learning here since the 1920s is surely one of the dramatic. We have not had another 1929. That is a crucial point.
I have a different question from Madame Lagarde, and it's actually about the connection between the independence of central bankers relative to the political class. And the reason I ask it is not just because of this particular moment. No,
it happens to be Wednesday.
But this gets to an interesting parallel. It gets an interesting parallel. If you go back and look at what happened actually in the 1920s and 1929 in particular, I read through some of the diaries of the Federal Reserve board members in the United States during this period. They were so worried about the politics of the moment. They were so cognizant of the politics. It wasn't, by the way, then that the president, in that case President Hoover, was telling them what to do exactly. It was that they were worried that the central bank unto itself, which was considered an experiment still,
It was still new.
would be disbanded. You talked about whether central bankers will be here. They weren't sure. They weren't sure whether they were going to tip the balance, and the Congress was going to say enough with you. And so I wonder. And there are lots of times also during some of these crises where the central bankers have to work hand in hand with the Treasury departments and presidents. So here we are in this moment. You publicly came out recently, and signed a letter around what's happening in the United States and our Federal Reserve. But how do you think about that?
First of all, I would distinguish between tribute to your work, because you really went into great details about how they thought in those days and what their fear was. But I would distinguish today between working hand in hand, which in a way we did during COVID,
regular
consultation and fiscal dependence.
We have offer on
so while working hand in hand in particular circumstances, as exceptional as they were, I think was completely legitimate. Whether there was more, too much, I think it's a good debate to have, and what form it took also an interesting one, because between the shock absorber on one side of the Atlantic and the fiscal spending straight to the consumer, I think the jury is out as to what was the most efficient. But fiscal dependency is another matter, which I would strongly argue against. For me, the great champion and hero of breaking the back of this dependency of central bankers was Volcker, who took the risk, major one, to really affect the economy, jeopardize the economy, to make sure that price stability would be delivered. And I think the standing he had with President Nixon at the time, in order to demonstrate the independence of the central bank to restore price stability, is something that we should, keep in the back of our mind. I'm not going to comment on what's happening just right now, including today, actually. Suffice to say that with a couple of other colleagues, we did take the initiative to argue in favor of central bank independence in the context of what happened about a week ago.
One of the really fascinating things is that the very idea of central bank independence is a product of the 1920s. And it's a product of the 1920s because most central banks, unlike the Fed, are old institutions, like the Bank of England, the Banque de France. And what they have to tackle in the early 20th century is the emergence of modern democracy. Modern democracy being multi-party, populist, social democrats, right-wingers. And it's in that context the Fed is born into the crisis. One of the reasons America doesn't have a central bank earlier is it is a democracy. And capitalist democracies are contentious, and money is contentious in capitalist democracies, and central banks are incredibly contentious, and America doesn't get there until the compromise of 1913 under Wilson. Whereas the others, the British, the French, the Germans, of course, have to actually figure out what it means to do market-centered, finance-centered, bank-for-bank banking in an actual live social democracy. And it's out of that this notion, from the very beginning, it was always agonistic to populist democracy. From the 1920s onwards, the phrase is Montague-Norman's phrase, naive-proof. You want to make the central bank naive-proof, which has a certain resonance in the current moment. Right? You need to make the central bank institutions proof against those kind of pressures. And it's been, I think, one of the productive sites for thinking about the relationship between expertise, politics, and the pressures of the markets ever since. Volcker might have different views about, but he certainly, I would entirely agree with you, set the paradigm of the modern independent central banker. Whether one likes the paradigm or not, but it's clearly the definitional moment under Carter, into Reagan, withstanding the pressures of the Reagan presidency, amongst other things.
But just to put things in context, the modern central bank represents the reality that we are not on the gold standard that we were on back 150 years ago. I'm not advocating we should be on the gold standard. It's just a very different world. And then the second salient difference between today and going back 100 some years ago is that debt is ubiquitous. And in a market economy where debt is ubiquitous, deflation
financial
is terrifying.
institution
Well, this is the reality after World War in the 20s, though. Debt is ubiquitous. Debt to GDP levels in Europe are higher than they'd ever been before after World War I, and no one's on the gold standard after World War I. So, in fact, they have to manage democracy, deal with 140, 150% of GDP debt, and figure out how you're going to do central banking. And amazingly, they opt for the gold standard. So it isn't then Britain, France, Germany, none of them are on the gold standard. Italy, in 1919, when the 20s begin, they all have to get back there by convergence with the US. This becomes the great clash between Keynes and Winston Churchill in the 1920s is, what price are we going to pay? This is the cross of gold moment. In America, it's William Jennings Bryan. In Europe, it's in the 1920s. What price are we going to pay for restabilizing? This is what made it feel like the bad Eurozone of the 2010s.
Right. But it's also a big difference between then and now. Because those monetary policies were totally rigid as a result, whereas we have much more flexibility and many more tools to be used.
And thank God for that.
And a tremendous number of success stories. Yeah. I mean, if you look at Europe when it comes to price stability, I don't want to jinx you, but it looks really good right now.
Thank you.
Larry, I think you wanted to take the conversation to a different place.
Yeah, I want to bring it back to today and the things that we need to be mindful of.
Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44,